Welcome back to The Great Rabbino. We're doing Zoom interviews, and this time we have an incredibly special guest who I've been reading a ton about and been watching because she's changing the game of baseball. Rachel Luba of Luba Sports. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. As good as can be, I guess, because all things considering, can't walk outside and that kind of stuff. I want to get into just all the stuff that you're doing, but I want to start from we just spoke about this a second ago. You were not a baseball fan and you were a gymnast, a very competitive gymnast. What are some of those lessons you took from gymnastics that you've brought with you into sort of like the pro sport agency world?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. While I have a very love-hate kind of relationship with the sport of gymnastics, that's a whole nother topic, but it definitely shaped me into kind of the person that I am today in a lot of ways, whether it's just work ethic, being diligent about being on top of my work, being efficient. But I think one of the biggest things is learning to be okay, or being okay with failure, and kind of using that. I guess as a gymnast, you fail your way to success. That is literally how the sport works. You fall, and then you stick it eventually. And so I think it kind of engraves in your mind this idea that that's how you get to success. Like, you have to fail your way there. And that's one of, I think, the most valuable things that I've kind of brought with me into, even the baseball world, and trying to, push boundaries and things like that, just with my gender and breaking into the industry. It's kind of you fail your way to success. I'm okay with failure.
So let's get into that a little bit. You're the youngest certified female agent in pro baseball history. When did you decide sports agency was something you wanted to do?
So I believe it was my freshman year at UCLA. I lived on the same floor as a bunch of the UCLA baseball players, so became good friends with them. I grew up with 3 brothers, so I was always used to being around, guys. And a lot of these players became my brothers while I was at school. And I started to I knew gymnastics, there was no future in terms of, a career into adulthood. The wear and tear on your body, it's impossible. So I always knew I needed another career, and I wanted to work in sports. I knew that because I was very passionate about sports. I was an athlete my whole life. So when I was trying to think about what I want to do in sports, and do I want to work for a team? And I guess that kind of the team side never really appealed to me. Most people, it does. They want to be a part of the camaraderie and the team, and, have that sense of team. As an individual sport athlete, I never cared about that really. While I get it and it makes sense, it just wasn't really for me. Whereas my passion definitely was with the individual athlete, him or herself. So I wanted to help the individual athlete. So I realized being an agent was, a very kind of attractive career. And then as I got to know, baseball players more, and learning about their industry and their sport, and it was a very fascinating sport to me. And so I just started teaching myself everything about the sport. And I'm a big believer in that you can teach yourself. If you want to do something, you can teach yourself it. It doesn't mean, you're going to learn it overnight. And I can attest to that. It was a lot of work, and, it was difficult finding sometimes people that were willing to teach it to me without, rolling their eyes, or, just because sometimes I had questions that might be stupid questions in the beginning, but, I taught myself the sport, and here I am.
It's so funny you say that, because that I could often, when I'm watching a game, and I love when my kids love going to the games. It's actually, they're pretty upset they can't go this year, but they love the hot dogs. That my oldest just learned how to keep score, so we were excited about that. So my wife is trying to give her a little guilt, why don't you want to watch the game with me? And then she does, and she'll ask a question who's that? I'm like, are you kidding? That's Mike Trout. How can you not know? Everyone knows. So yeah, I get the eye rolling. You don't mean to do it, but baseball seems so simple to someone who grew up with it, but it's not. if you haven't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then you land, I mean, the story really, I think begins, certainly doesn't end, with your first major client is Trevor Bauer, who's one of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball. You don't even have to say that. I'll say that for you. And a well-known individual from his time with the Indians and now with the Reds. So you land this mega client who, like, if we just look back to like Jerry Maguire, when he goes out on his own, right, he loses the big client. He has to go with this like small client. So, or at least Steinberg, better known as Jerry Maguire. So how did that happen? How did your relationship with Trevor Bauer sort of flourish and become about?
Yeah, so Trevor also played baseball at UCLA. So we had a class together my freshman year, became friends, kind of stayed in touch over the years. And he was, you know, when I say that it was hard sometimes to find people that were willing to teach me the game, he was one of the few people that was willing to teach me the game. And I used to pick his brain. And, you know, it makes sense. If, you know, anyone who kind of knows Trevor or anything about him, that makes sense. Like, he loves to teach, and he loves just kind of, you know, to break down the game in a different way. And so he always was super helpful for me. And then as I, you know, kind of went through law school, and he knew this was a dream of mine, and I was going to make it happen. You know, we stayed in touch. And then, you know, when I was at the union working there, I started, you know, really seeing like the good, the bad, the ugly of the agency industry. And I eventually kind of realized that there's a better way to do this, I think. And, you know, sure enough, Trevor is also the athlete that isn't afraid to do something different and to push boundaries and to find more efficient ways to do things. And so when I started kind of picking his brain about this idea and, you know, having an agency model that much more resembled, you know, a law firm, and basically charging more of like billable hours versus just taking a percentage of the value of their contract. And, you know, it started to make sense to him. And I think as he, and like, this was a long process of like several years of really talking to him about it and, you know, convincing him of, look, it's more efficient. You know, it's going to provide you ultimately, I think, more value than you're actually getting at your agency right now. And, you know, you'll be able to do a lot more with your money. And that just kind of made sense to him. And so eventually, after a long time of, you know, convincing him, because it's not easy to convince someone, I mean, to leave an agency, let alone to then leave an agency to someone who really has no true, you know, agent experience and, you know, is doing something completely different. And so, you know, it was a lot of work, but eventually he was bought in and decided to, you know, make the change.
Yeah, that's amazing. So let's talk about some of the ways you're changing the game and some of the goals of that. So clearly you have used social media and sort of that platform. I don't know any agent that I can think of using it better. There are some using it, but I don't think better. And also spending the face time you're giving with your client is noticeable. Whereas, like, you know, Drew Rosenhaus, no knock on Drew Rosenhaus, but he represents so many people that he couldn't do that. That would be impossible. So how, you know, so what are some of those ways you talked about how you're charging, but what are some of the other ways you're pushing sort of the boundaries of the game of baseball or agency in general?
So, I mean, one of the big ways, like you talked about, was just this idea of social media and using social media to grow your brand. And I'm a huge proponent of, I see the value in players having a brand. And that's not to say that every player needs to create a brand, because there are plenty of players out there that just, you know, are totally like, they don't want a brand. They just want to play the sport, go home to their families, and that's it. And that's cool. But there are more players than you would think or than you would realize out there that they would love to have some sort of brand and, you know, influence due to their job, but they kind of look at it as like, I'm a baseball player, we're boring, because that's what they've been told. And we're not allowed to have personality, and we're not allowed to really, it's not about us, it's about the team. And while that's all, great and dandy, like there's a lot you can do with having a brand, and there's a lot you can do post career if you create this brand for yourself. And so, obviously using social media is a great way to do it. And I figured in the beginning, I realized like, look, if I'm going to preach this, like I should practice what I preach, and I should, try to build a brand myself. And so that was kind of what led me to starting to build my social media. I started on Instagram because it was where I was most comfortable. And then actually Trevor was the one who convinced me. I had a Twitter account from when I was interning at an agency in law school, and I had to create it in order to communicate with the clients that they represented. And so I just followed only those guys, like their clients, and never used it. I don't like Twitter. I'm not a big Twitter person, but he was like, listen, you need to use Twitter because the baseball world kind of lives and breathes on Twitter. And so it was in, I think like the end of October when I really launched my agency that I was like, all right, I'll try using Twitter.
Don't read the comments.
That's the hardest part. And I had one or two moments where it was like, I got caught up in, Twitter beef or, with trolls. And you know what? Thank God for having a client that has been so involved, who has had so many run-ins with that kind of stuff, that, that was actually a teaching moment on his end again, where he kind of, sat me down and was like, look, you need to, turn off your Twitter sometimes, and just turn off your phone, turn off your notifications. Like there are people that hide behind keyboards that have nothing better to do with their lives. And, so that Twitter, I just started growing my, Twitter, but that's the thing is I realized that there were no agents out there. And this was one of the things I realized when I wanted to be an agent. It was so hard to find out, like, what does an agent really do? What's it like? What's the industry like? It's this very secretive, kind of industry that it's almost like they don't want to tell you their secrets, because they think if you really know what they do, it's gonna, decrease the value of what they do. And I'm a big believer in just give people information, give them free information. I don't think that just by giving someone information, it means that, your job is less valuable, or, there's going to be more competition out there for you. I don't really think that that's the case. Not everyone, give people information. Not everyone's going to be able to work as hard or do what you do, or, whatever. So I just started, talking about things about the industry, giving people insight, letting them see kind of, dropping the curtain and letting them see what the job is all about.
So yeah, Brandon Bishop, who's a player for the Mariners, just had this like thread about whether he should use his voice or not and speak up about, I don't remember the issue, but, and we see it very much in the WNBA. They've been the leaders in terms of advocacy and social justice and things like that, and having a voice. In the NBA right now, but we'll see if that continues. This whole season for all sports is so unique and different, and we don't know what will stay and what will go. So how do you expand? What's the next step for Luba Sports?
Obviously, to get more baseball clients, I want to, expand a lot within baseball. And, then eventually I think the goal is to, expand into other sports, have other divisions. I want to take the same philosophy, this philosophy of, more of an a la carte service agency where you choose what's important to you, what you like. If it's just the contract negotiation, then you pay for the contract negotiation. If you want, I say this all the time and everyone's like, it's so rude that you say that, but like Trevor Bauer's super high maintenance, and he's not like, that doesn't offend him, and it's not insulting. It's great. It's how I make money. But, he wants to do a lot, and I love that. That's great. He has a lot of goals, but he's paying for it, and he's getting those services in return. So I want to take this idea of, you choose how you want your agency, your representation to work for you. And, it you should be able to apply it throughout, many different sports, and, even, actors eventually, and media people, entertainment, all that stuff. That kind of representation should be able to apply throughout, I think.
I think it's brilliant. I think you're brilliant, clearly, and more importantly, while you might not, there might always be the sort of standard that we've always known, but you're moving and giving different options to different players, which is crucial. Without options, we can't evolve. I want to thank you so much for your time. This was awesome. I learned a ton, and I hope everyone enjoyed the interview.
Yep. Thank you for having me.